Hello, everybody. It's me, Albatross. I'm back, and we're going to finish up Exodus in this episode. And now, this might be a little bit of a shorter episode compared to other episodes. However, that doesn't make it any less important. If anything, I think that this episode in particular is going to be kind of like a foundation point for the rest of our videos. And the reason I say that is because we get some important information. We're at the point in this story where all the plagues have been performed, all the firstborn in Egypt are, dead, and the Israelites are finally going with Moses out of Egypt. So, what happens once they leave Egypt? What happens? Well, first of all, we learn that, kind of during their journey, once they finally leave Egypt, we kind of learn something. We learned that they didn't necessarily want to leave Egypt to begin with. Not really. Now, I don't know if they're leaving because of the Pharaoh and the Egyptians are angry after losing all those babies. Maybe they're leaving because they're afraid they'll lose their firstborn babies. Even though you find out, spoiler alert, they will. That Passover was just a temporary thing that they too have to sacrifice their firstborn to Yahweh as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now we're at the point where they're leaving Egypt, right? Now, look at this map here. You see the red line represents the actual journey that they took to Canaan. And you can see that there was a much, much shorter way to get to Canaan. But they took the absolute longest possible way. And we learn why they took this long way. In Exodus 13 verses 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though it was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So, obviously, whatever they had going on in Egypt, it hadn't gotten to the point just yet where the Israelites were willing to fight for their freedom. You see what I mean? It wasn't so oppressive that they would have been willing to do anything to get out of there. In fact, it doesn't even sound like they wanted to leave at all, because this isn't the only time. The Israelites bring it up again later, several times in Exodus, the very next chapter, Exodus 14, 12. They literally tell Moses, didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. So, obviously, they hadn't gotten to that point yet, which makes me wonder, why did God help them leave if they weren't even ready to leave yet? You know what I mean? Haven't you ever heard the expression, people don't usually get help unless they themselves want help? I mean, I don't know. I'm not trying to compare it to this, but, it sounds similar. The Israelites clearly didn't want to leave. But perhaps, after all of Egypt's firstborn children had died and theirs didn't, perhaps they were thinking they didn't have any other choice. Of course, I don't know. I wasn't there. But apparently, Yahweh knew, because he takes them on such a long route, because he's afraid if he takes them directly straight through the Philistine country, that the moment if the Philistines wanted to face war with them, that they would just turn right around and go back. So instead, they go, the longest direction possible. I'm not exactly sure when it was they faced the Egyptians, and on this map, if they faced it. I'm assuming they must have faced them before they went to Rephidim and Mount Sinai. I don't know. It really just depends on how much you believe all this is true. Because it also says that the Pharaoh dies, even though we don't really get that in any other historical record. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but there's a lot of, fuzziness in the story. A lot of fuzziness. But the biggest fuzziness of all is the fact that Yahweh would actually admit that, if they didn't go the extra long route, that they would turn around and go back home to Egypt. And it's sad because when you look at how this whole story plays out later, anyone who knows how the story plays out, they probably would have been better off just staying there. But that's just my opinion. Let's move on then. Let's move on. Now, during this journey, right, it's unclear if Moses knew what was expected of the Israelites before or after they left. But at some point during this journey, Yahweh does tell Moses that you and your fellow Israelites will have to consecrate all your firstborn to me. Every firstborn belongs to me. He says that to them. And I find it odd because it's like they weren't obliged by that rule in Egypt. I wonder if they knew about this rule, would they have left at all? Because the Passover happened while they were in Egypt. And the Passover almost makes it sound like that the Israelites are the rare exception, that they don't have to offer up their firstborn child. But that is only during the Passover. That's not during every other occasion. Like, they still have to give up their firstborn too. It was that one occasion where they didn't have to, and they still had to give up a sacrifice in a way, because it was like the entire tribe of Levite that they had to essentially give up to God. So, I mean, like, no matter what situation it is, they never get off totally scot-free. You know what I mean? They always end up having to sacrifice something important. And I know, I just love people who love to give, like, all these excuses, like in the Bible, for all this behavior and all these kinds of actions and stuff. Because a lot of people will use the excuse like, God had to judge them. Because, they were evil. They committed evil. They couldn't just, get away with it. That would be like, I actually heard one guy say the other day. They compared this to a police officer. Like if he just walks up on a criminal who just got done killing a bunch of people, and that police officer took that criminal and went and got like a bunch of cheeseburgers instead of taking him to jail. And I was thinking, what kind of dumb example is that? The example they were trying to say that if, God didn't do all this evil that we read about in the Old Testament, it would have been like him letting evil slide. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, because when you look at the stories when the Israelites are bringing about judgment on these different groups of people, you learn that, like, the children, the virgin girls, the little children, what did they do to deserve this judgment? That's why I have a problem believing that. Because it always, like in these stories, it always seems like the children are the ones who always have to pay the most. And if they're really being judged for child sacrifice, that doesn't even make sense. Because it's the virgin girls that always get punished. They get enslaved and they become essentially sex slaves to these Israelites. So I don't believe that's divine judgment at all. You all believe what you want. I don't. But anyways, you don't believe me? You don't believe me? Okay, look it up. Exodus 13, verses 1 to 5. Read all of that. And you will see that the Israelites are going to be very much expected to do the firstborn sacrifice as well. So anyways, so the Israelites, with all that said and done, they crossed the Red Sea, and supposedly the Red Sea crashed back over the Egyptians, even though we don't get really much record of that. But who knows? Maybe it happened. So, they are, I don't know how many miles, but they are nowhere near Canaan because they went like the opposite direction. They went south instead and end up here. As you can, let me pull the map back up. As you can see, instead of going like east and then north, they go east and then south. All the way down to Mount Sinai. And then where they stay for, well, spoiler alert, they stay there for like 40 years until the whole first generation is dead. In fact, the whole first generation, the ones who were promised this promised land, they never even get to see it. They spend the rest of their days struggling in the desert, starving, diseased, dehydration, all of that stuff. Probably thinking the whole time we should have just stayed in effing Egypt. We should have stayed. Well, that's what I would have been thinking. Because Egypt, yeah, they were technically enslaved, but they were fed. They had water sources. Like, and the Egyptians didn't even seem to have a problem necessarily with them until all these plagues and all this stuff started happening via Moses and Yahweh. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe they had a problem with them before. But it certainly took a lot of plagues for them to either want to go or for Egypt to want them to go. Took a lot of plagues. But, after all those plagues and after the Dead Sea crossing, or I'm sorry, not the Dead Sea crossing. My bad. I'm getting those seas mixed up. The Red Sea crossing. After all that, I'm sure, I'm assuming the Israelites, if they did want to go back, they probably felt after the Red Sea incident that they couldn't go back. I'm just guessing. Because even though they were technically welcome in Egypt before, they were still very much foreigners. So, that probably ruined any opportunity of them going back to Egypt. So essentially, they were kind of stuck with Yahweh at that point. We could all ask ourselves, well, couldn't they have just walked away and left and went somewhere else? Maybe. But maybe they would have taken the chance on Yahweh, cursing them or something, He didn't take things like that lightly. It didn't seem like a free will has a lot to do with any of this situation. And that's just my opinion. It really doesn't seem like it. You know what it kind of reminds me of, to be for real with y'all? It reminds me of, anyone ever seen that movie Slumdog Millionaire? You know how, the orphans were, living in big, giant garbage piles and scavenging for food and things like that, living in trash, and all of a sudden you see this well-dressed, charismatic-looking gentleman come among these orphans, giving them, things like soda and food and candy, offering for them to come with him out of the big garbage heap. And of course, they're children, they're orphans, they're hungry. They agree, they think that this guy is just such a nice man. They go with him. And come to find out, this man took them from that situation and placed them in a far, far worse, more oppressive situation. Now you might be thinking, what's much worse than living in a big trash heap? Well, this guy liked to do things to these children, like blind them, get rid of some of their limbs, things like that, because he would use these children to beg for him on his behalf. And children who were blind or crippled or disabled got more money from people. Yes, it's very sick and disgusting. Kind of sounds like what Yahweh's doing with the Israelites. You know what I mean? It's like he's coming along, offering them something better. A life of, quote, freedom, unquote. All this stuff. And bless their hearts, they have no way of knowing what that future holds for them. They have no way of knowing at that point that they're going to eventually die in that desert. They'll never get to see their promised land. Many of them will die from disease or dehydration and infection, illness, all of the above. Or just because Yahweh feels like killing a bunch of them at any given time. So, it just doesn't seem like he's taken them from a bad situation and put them in a better one. If anything, it seems like he's taken them from a very oppressive situation and put them in an even more oppressive situation, like an incomparably oppressive situation. But you'll see what I mean. We're about to get into it, everything that goes down in this desert over that 40 years, according to the Bible. Because it's some really dark, dark, dark stuff. Really dark stuff that goes down. It's really disgusting. I don't know how people have been able to excuse any of this for so long, but they have. They figured out a way. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to tell the truth, because I'm sick of sugarcoating things that people want to sugarcoat, and then, people like to pick and choose. I'm putting myself in the Israelites' position, though. You know what I mean? I kind of feel like I understand how they feel. I would have felt like, yeah, we were better off in Egypt. I mean, we were enslaved. We weren't held in as high of esteem as they were. But we were fed. Our children weren't slaughtered. We weren't given disease just because we said we were hungry. We weren't punished whenever we said we were thirsty. So, I don't know. That's just how I feel about it. Okay, so what else am I missing out here in Exodus? So, we get the fact, no, they didn't necessarily want to leave Egypt. They were fine staying there. But they probably had really no choice after all the plagues and after all the death. So, they were probably kind of put in that situation. And so they wander to Mount Sinai. And of course, Yahweh just kind of waits for his opportunity to drop the bomb on them, to be like, oh, well, you guys are never going to see the promised land. It's your next generation who will. Because you didn't have any faith in me, even though they crossed the Red Sea and followed him to this desert. They were just freaking thirsty. But anyways, yeah, don't worry. Moses gets punished for all that too. So does Aaron. But anyways, I'm getting too far ahead of myself. We will pick up where we left off in Leviticus. Or actually, wait, no, there's still some of Exodus left. But, yeah, we'll read through the laws at the end of Exodus, even though they go through it all over again in Leviticus and Numbers. I'm not going to reread these laws over and over again, but I will read them once. Because these are important rules to know for the rest of the story throughout the Bible. And you will see that, like, whenever they did these sacrifices and these rituals, they had to be, like, on point, or they risked their own lives and the lives of their people. So anyways, we'll get back to all that soon. Thanks for listening.